Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It is program 821, August the 31st, 1987. I'm going to do a lot more, maybe an entire hour next week, on the Philippines, on the death squad set up by the United States government and the CIA, and our mercenaries, the role of John Singlaub, but it will take about an hour to do it properly, so I'm going to wait and cover the Philippines story next week. There's a lot of material, and hopefully maybe I can condense it to 1 hour. August the 22nd, 1983, just 4 years ago, is when Ninoy Aquino was shot at the airport landing going back to the Philippines. And now 4 years later, the people that were doing the shootout this time wanted to kill him and his mother, the son rather, and his mother. The son was protected by 3 bodyguards who were killed and fell on top of him. And they thought he was dead and left him for dead. So there's going to be a lot of bloodshed because, of course, those people with those kinds of tendencies don't take no for an answer. Also, 1 week after Ninoy Aquino was killed in the Philippines is when Larry McDonald was on the Korean airline that went down and went into the Soviet Union and was shot down. And that organization, Western Goals, that he was head of, was then turned over to Carl Spitz Channel. And, of course, I've been waiting to do broadcasts. I'll have to just earmark a time to go into the significance of that date and how certain people changed their jobs and shifted around and what it meant specifically to Central America and to the White House. So now this shootout comes again in August. They may like August for that particular month for having these things happen, and maybe people who are nervous about their security should stay in the month of August. Also, 2 years ago, in 1985, on broadcast 716, I was referring to an article written by Thomas Powers. It was published in the LA Times, titled Control of the Contras as a Hazardous Illusion. And he referred to the fact that the CIA has created a new massive army under Ronald Reagan, and now the national security can work with the CIA and private individuals and organizations and create a lot of chaos. And Powers said to control this group is an illusion. There are 3 loose cannons on the deck. 1, the Contra Army, which is put together by the CIA. 2, the National Security Council that likes running secret wars without any kibitzing from Congress. 3, private funding. And he referred to pharmacies and businessmen, and I think of the Vatican and the Knights of Malta and Reverend Moon and the World Anti-Communist League, the private funding groups, and he said that they will put in money for the Contras, and they expect the president being grateful and give them business and so forth down in other parts of the world if they helped his project with the Contras. Now, I also mentioned on that broadcast the problem with these private individuals and the private funding, and I referred to retired generals such as General John Singlaub, president of the World Anti-Communist League, who works with Nazis, death squads, with sworn alliances to Hitler's 1,000-year Reich, with neo-Nazis. He works and advises the National Security Council, the American Security Council, the Contras, and private groups that were pouring in millions. And I said 2 years ago, Singlaub helped set up Robert Brown. I've had that on the air many times, the publisher of Soldier of Fortune. Out of Brown comes the mercenaries and the survivalists that go to these places and do the killings and shootings and then can be separated from the United States government, even though a retired general set them up. And I referred to John Singlaub being on the board of Western Goals with their computers being fed from the Los Angeles Police Department to Washington, to the military, and to Germany. Last week I referred to Western Goals and the money that they're getting from monarchy in Germany and widows and other persons, I suppose. But Singlaub was a major threat to the stability of the world in terms of how these groups would operate. So 2 years ago, I was referring to him in those terms, and now his name is very much in the news regarding the Philippine near coup that can just be hanging by a thread, that government each day, as the army with the weapons can sweep in and maybe change the government to the way they think the Philippines should be run. Last week I mentioned Reagan's overtures for peace and to Central America, and based upon what I think are blackmail situations due to the massive evidence of drug traffic with his freedom fighters, as well as CIA persons around the world, specifically the freedom fighters and the homosexual ring around the Iran-Contra people out of this Carl Spitz Channel office, and the arms to Iran. Those things would force the president, the last part of his administration, to go seeking peace. Conrad had a cartoon in the LA Times this past week where Ronald Reagan is holding a big sheet to read in front of the TV camera titled Central American Peace Plan. And then there's another Ronald Reagan behind him with his left hand holding a piece of paper called Contra Aid, and a right hand is holding a gun in his back. And one is looking a little startled and the other is looking stern. I don't want to continue this broadcast any further without just mentioning this terrible thing that's happened in Arcadia, Florida, where a home was burned down and a family has been caused to move because the boys have AIDS, not AIDS themselves, but an AIDS virus, or suspected of being contaminating other children, which it seems hardly likely in the school. And these children have been threatened with their life. They were told their house would be burned down. There was a court order, and to take children 8, 9, and 10 years of age and keep them out of a public school where there's very little chance, I mean, it's practically nil, of anything happening to the other children. It's only symptomatic of that fear and fascism that's taking place in this country. And then to firebomb their home and burn everything they have, every toy and thing. These kids have hemophilia, they had blood transfusions, all three of them, and now they are being absolutely tortured in the United States of America. If this were happening in the Soviet Union, we'd say, where are your freedoms? What are you doing to your people? This is horrible. And we look the other way when it happens here. I think this is one of the most tragic incidences of obvious fascism. There are home parades of the likes of Ollie North and Poindexter, making heroes out of them. But on the other side of the coin, while they favor fascism, this is an example, a terrible example of what happened to this family, the Ray family. And it's so close to Nazi Germany that people better study it loud and clear and figure out what to do in these circumstances, because once this hysteria is whipped up, how far is it going to go? It'll go from AIDS people to blacks or to Jews, or for whatever they want. And if they suspect somebody of having AIDS, or if there's a leak from a doctor that somebody has AIDS, are the homes going to be burned down? Are people going to be hung, just as the Klan did years ago? And where is it going to lead? We don't have any idea how bad this hysteria can get, and it should be stopped. I think the people that firebombed their home should get the most strict sentencing that a person could get. I doubt if they will get that, but I believe that there has to be some kind of a lesson that these things aren't allowed in this country. And on top of that, Reagan says that aid tests for immigrants and illegal aliens, anybody coming into this country, starting December 1st, all people seeking immigrant visas in the United States, all illegal aliens will be screened for AIDS. And what if some are excluded on political reasons and they're told that they have AIDS and they're not allowed to be tested here and they're returned? How do we know that there won't be a marking of some kind just indicating they have it? Who is going to read the reports? The San Francisco Examiner had a story by Norman Melnick titled, Joachim Peiper may be the absolutely evil Nazi who got away. And this name caught my eye immediately, because in the series of Nazis that I've studied in the Battle of the Bulge, there was Mr. Peiper, Sepp, Dietrich, and Fritz Kramer. Those three were the key men at the Dachau trials that I watched and studied so closely. And the article is about a man who's 84 years old. His name is Burton Ellis. He lives in Merced, California. And he was one of the prosecutors, the chief prosecutor at the Malmedy trial. And I called him yesterday and asked him about Fritz Kramer. I'll do more details on it with you. He told me that Fritz Kramer that he tried and convicted was an older man, about 55 years old. He wasn't in his 30s, which isn't true. And I wondered if Joachim Peiper was the absolute evil and his home burned down and he wasn't in the home. He had warnings that they were going to come. If he wasn't there, if Peiper was out and Dietrich was out and Kramer was unaccounted for, what was there about Peiper that made him more dangerous Or were all of these people dangerous? And I still think the key to what's happening in Washington, D.C. has to do with Piper's partner, Fritz Kramer. I asked this gentleman if he thought it was impossible, actually, that the two Kramers could be the same in the War Department here and the one that he prosecuted. But I asked him if he knew anything about this Kramer's background, the one he prosecuted in Germany, because there's no history really about how he became a general. And he said, no, he never heard of it. And I said, do you know where he went after the war? And he said, no, he had no idea where he went after the war. And I told him that Israel, the documentation center, had no record of him as a war criminal. But I said, you prosecuted him, so he was convicted. And he said, well, I guess Israel doesn't keep good books. And so I said, well, do you think that a Nazi war criminal could come to this country? And he said, yes, they could. Many of them did come into this country. And we sort of went around in circles, and I took his address, and he said maybe he'd come to Carmel and visit with me and go over the books I have on the Battle of the Bulge and on the, not the prosecution, but what happened before and after. We know Kramer was prosecuted, so was Piper, and so was Sepp Dietrich. And all of a sudden, years later, we're told that Piper may be the most evil one who got away. Well, did Kramer get away too? If Piper got away and Dietrich got away, could Kramer get away and not a trace of him anywhere? You bet he could get away, and I believe I know where he went, and those of you who listen to World Watchers know where I think he is. There also was an article yesterday, British government may never release the Hess documents. It's a long article. It was in the Monterey Herald, but it just says that normally historians would have access to at least some of the material 30 years after the flight of Adolf Hitler's top aide, but none of it is available. And the hint is that maybe it had something to do with information about the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. But I believe that Hess set up arrangements with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor when they lived in the Bahamas. And also he traveled to South America from the 1930s up till 1939, and he had set up a network for the takeover of the world that would include Germans moving down to Argentina. And they had taken control of Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, and Uruguay, Paraguay, and one by one, and Stroessner in Paraguay, the Nazis began to get control of the countries in South America and Peru. So the story about the Hess documents never being released leads me to believe, again, that the history of Hess that I studied has more to do with the activities in South America that affect Central America today, and the people of the World Anti-Communist League that are part of the international Nazi network are very influential in our activities in Central America and Asia. And I believe that Hess set up a great deal of this network long before he flew to England. Of course, before he flew, because afterwards he couldn't have set it up, but he was working on it for many, many years. Now, last week I cited a quotation from the New Republic that referred to Western Goals as a crackpot organization in one sentence and didn't give any explanation of the importance of that organization and its relationship, of course, to the Iran-Contra affair right now. Another book that missed the point on the key links to not only Iran-Contra but to the world fascism that you're going to be see emerging more and more is Inside the League. It's a book written by Scott Anderson and John Anderson, and it's a good book. Inside the League, Terrorists, Nazis, and Death Squads. And in one section of the book, almost in the beginning, they describe the Romanian Aryan Guard and how they burned down the synagogues in Romania, how they took Jews and hung them up on meat hooks and slit their throats, and people in town also had their throats cut. They skinned the Jews like carcasses. All their skin was taken off, blood dripping. And this little section on the Romanian Aryan Guard goes into the horrible things that they did and how they committed these terrible atrocities. Then it says on page 19, and a World Watcher called me to remind me it was in this book, the massacre did not mean the end of the Legion. This is the Romanian Iron Guard. The German SS commander in Romania, Otto von Borschwing, hid the top Legion leaders and spirited them across the border into Germany in SS uniform to be dressed like part of the German army out of Romania. Among them were Horia Sima and Viorel Trufia. They were joined by many, many more, and they were put under protective custody and got the same privileges as German officers. Now, at the time of Watergate, there was an article saying that Senator Lugar from Indiana was in Madrid and had received money for Richard Nixon's reelection from Horace Sima that went into a Swiss bank. Also, Mr. Trufia was speaking at the Senate at the prayer breakfast. He was very close to the Nixon administration. And Otto von Borschwing, the head of the Iron Guard who protected these people, came to work for Elmer Bobst, the godfather of Richard Nixon, who helped engineer his political career after he lost to John Kennedy in 1960. So Sima, von Borschwing, and Trufia were all part of the Republican Party not many years later, in addition to Nikolai Malaksa of the Romanian Iron Guard, who came to this country and immediately went to Richard Nixon's office in Whittier, California. Now, in this book, at the bottom, the only mention of von Borschwing, there's a footnote. Otto von Borschwing was never brought to justice for his role in harboring the Iron Guardists for their war crimes. After the war, he worked for U.S. Army counterintelligence. He emigrated to the United States in 1961, and he remained a free man until his death in 1982. Now, he didn't come to this country in 1961. He came in 1954 and worked for Elmer Bobst and the Warner Lambert Pharmaceutical Company, and then for the Cabot Cole, the Henry Cabot Lodge family. And he came here and was very active. And the belief that he came late in 1961 and quietly died misses the whole point about who Otto von Borschwing is. And going back to the article that Pete Carey did in San Jose Mercury, because it's pertinent to the Iran-Contra affair, he tells how in 1969 he was working for a company called Trans International Computer Investment Corporation, TCI, a high-flying investment firm, and he had come to this country from the Waffen-SS. He had worked in Palestine, where he was suspected of being a German spy. He was a Nazi SS, Waffen-SS general. He helped the CIA build a spy network in post-war Eastern Europe. He was the head of post-war German intelligence activity. Reinhard Gehlen was doing this, and then von Borschwing became the controller of Gehlen's CIA operation. And the article continues, not only did he work for Warner Lambert Pharmaceutical in New Jersey, he was close to the honorary board chairman, former New Jersey Governor Alfred Driscoll in New Jersey. His contacts at Warner Lambert were way out of proportion for his job. Then he went to Cabot Manufacturing, and the point is that he came to California in 1969 in a high-technology job, which was that TCI, that Trans International Computer Company. And working for TCI, there were two subsidiaries in Palo Alto and Mountain View. Once was Advanced Information System, IIS, and the International Imaging System, the IIS and the AIS, Advanced Information System and the International Imaging, and I mentioned them before. And it was International Imaging that Albert Hakim bought when he left Iran after the Shah of Iran was kicked out. He came to California and picked up the company of International Imaging. So the point about the book, The World Anti-Communist League, is the footnote is wrong about when he came, and it misses the point because it excludes those years with Nixon's godfather, who could manipulate him into the White House eventually after the two Kennedy brothers were dead. And all of the Iron Guard hierarchy, Nikolai Malaksa and Trufia and Sima and von Borschwing, were closely affiliated at the end of World War II, closely affiliated to the Republican Party and active in financing it and doing machinations for it. So this is the enterprise that Secord is talking about when he becomes full partner with Albert Hakim and talks about the enterprise. And I've had this on the air many times, and I'll keep repeating it week after week till eventually it sinks in. What the enterprise was the International Imaging. Now, there was an article just several weeks ago, actually August 17th, Elevator at John Kennedy Assassination Site Okayed. This article says, and many of you probably saw it, that you might know that the elevator at the Texas School Book Depository only went to the 4th floor. And Lee Harvey Oswald was working on the 6th floor, and then he was found the minute the police entered the building down below at the 1st floor having a Coca-Cola. But the story sticks that Oswald did the assassination. Now the city of Dallas is going to put a elevator from the 4th to the 6th floor, and it's going to be a place where the public can see. It's been closed since the Kennedy assassination in 1963. So the city okayed a 60-foot elevator tower for the north side of the building, so you can come in. Everybody who goes to Dallas or who lives in Dallas can go to the Texas School Book Depository and be on the floor to see where Oswald stood when he shot the President of the United States. So that this story is going to last forever, because you cannot erase the fact of the gunmen from behind the grassy knoll, or put the freight trains back on the track and have people go see the track or the trees, the trajectory of the murder. There will people be pouring through the book depository. It'll be a tourist place to reinforce the story that Lee Harvey Oswald killed the president. Now, the Brazil legislature just this past week warned on amnesty, and this is important because of the people running our country today. It says Brazil's army minister has warned the nation's lawmakers against approving an amnesty for officers who opposed the 1964 coup, saying it would disrupt the military hierarchy and cost the country as much as $1 billion in back pay. Now, right after John Kennedy was killed in 1963, there was a coup in Brazil put in by our Central Intelligence Agency, directed by Vernon Walters and Frank Carlucci, our current national security advisor. They've lived in a police state, virtual police state, for 24 years, and the idea of giving them amnesty now still goes against the grain. We caused so much pain over there, and now they say it would disrupt the military hierarchy. In 1987, it would disrupt the hierarchy to forgive those people who objected to the coup 23 years ago. And in the same breath, Frank Carlucci was blaming the Sandinistas for brutally ending protests in the street. And he had an article in Reverend Moon's Washington Times saying that the Marxist Sandinistas were breaking their promise that they were going to democratize their government, and the police broke up a demonstration with dogs and truncheons and cattle prods. Well, people in Nicaragua said that persons from the American embassy were creating street riots, and then the Sandinistas responded, and the kind of objection that Carlucci is voicing August 17th, 1987, about what Daniel Ortega does in Nicaragua is nothing like the statistics of the coup in Brazil and what went on with those death squads and the beatings and the torture that went on in Brazil. Just get your history books and go back to that time period, or your newspapers. Frank Carlucci, the very person who put in this terrible dictatorship for 24 years in Brazil, sits as the head of our National Security Council now and tells the Sandinistas they're not behaving in a democratic way. Since when does he want democracy? He didn't want it in Portugal. He didn't want it in the Belgian Congo. He doesn't want it in Brazil. What right have these hypocrites who are in power today to chew off another government on not being democratic when they've supported the junta in Argentina, the death squads in the Philippines, in South Korea, in Taiwan? The hypocrisy of this administration has been a continuous history, 40 years of the CIA, of blushing at nothing but a double talk, a bunch of lies, and always supporting those people that are deadly, that give no political rights at all. You might have seen an article this week that Oliver North saw Edwin Meese, and they talked about examining North's papers, and Meese was asked by Oliver North to give him 2 days of time before they came into the office, and he asked for 2 days, and Edwin Meese gave him 2 days, and those are the 2 days that he shredded the papers. He said, can I have 24 or 48 hours? And he asked for a delay of Edwin Meese of 24 to 48 hours, and of course Meese gave it, and that's when all the burning began, because Meese is the president's best friend, and all their administration would be brought down if the papers hadn't been shredded. And John Poindexter, the admiral, is asking for his third star back. He wants to leave with his head held high, probably before he goes to prison or appeals it. And so he has so much gall that he wants his star back. John Singlaub is down there trying to overthrow the Philippines, and General Secord is writing an article this month that just came out for Playboy. The newspapers this past week had a story, probe finds no Contra drug dealings. Congressional Iran-Contra investigators have found no evidence to support allegations that the current Nicaragua Contra leaders trafficked in drug. But a top CIA official said a lot of people associated with Eden Pastora, the former Contra leader based in Costa Rica, were linked to cocaine trafficking. Now, they're singling out Eden Pastora because he is very much a part of the Christic Institute suit that it makes the allegations of John Hull's Ranch and the Watergate persons, John Singlaub and Secord and Hakim and Sjeklocha and the whole gang of being involved with drug traffic down in Central America. So they single out the Eden Pastora connections as being drug connections because Pastora left the Contras because he said the CIA and the Somozans want to control the entire operation, and he wanted to get out of it. Now, we had information in the news just about a month ago that Jesse Helms, the senator, and John Singlaub were down there coaxing Eden Pastora to work for them, and that they would send him to Europe to speak for the Contras, and when they took over the country, he would be assured a position. They were trying to woo him. Well, if the CIA had evidence that Eden Pastora was part of a drug traffic linked in Costa Rica and cocaine trafficking, then I just wonder why they made overtures to him if they're so concerned about drug traffic. So they want it both ways. When there's a mention of drug traffic, then they say Pastora, because Pastora has turned his back on them and is thinking of going back to Nicaragua. But the report out of the committee was that there were no drugs, and of course it's similar to the Watergate hearings, not the Watergate, the Kennedy assassination investigation, a document I have, a correspondence that I've mentioned on the air many times. One of the Warren Commission members' attorney wrote to the others saying that we can't, as far as Jack Ruby's contacts with the crime syndicate or right-wingers or so forth, we'll say there's absolutely no evidence of Ruby's contacts, any of these people, because we haven't gone into it, so we can say we found no evidence of it. Well, this is what is going on. There is no evidence because the Iran-Contra hearings are not going into it. I mentioned several times the magazine Covert Action publications. Somebody on the talk show part of my program last week called in, and I want to tell people, if you don't have that magazine, that you should subscribe to it. This past issue is all about the drug running of the intelligence community, and I wish every member of the Senate and House would not only receive this, but read this. The problem is if you send it to them, they may file it away in the wastebasket and never see it. The current issue of Covert Action Information Bulletin has one article after the other, some of the titles of the chapters: Running Drugs and Secret Wars, the Australian Heroin Connection, the Nugan drug clients, Afghan rebels and drugs, the cocaine connections, who deals drugs, drugs, politics, and disinformation, mind control in Canada, lest we forget about the Iran-Contra drugs, chemical and biological warfare, the origin and spread of AIDS, is AIDS non-infectious, and Deltagate. And this is a whole issue on the CIA and cocaine and drugs and heroin, the Contras, the Costa Rica connections, and around the world. There links to Southeast Asian war and around the world. So it's a very good magazine. If you don't have it, I suggest you subscribe. The address is P.O. Box 50272, Washington, D.C., 20004. There's 3 zeros there. And also get the last 4 issues on the religious right. And they have a very good series. These last 4 issues have been wonderful. So get those if you subscribe. Go the past one and get a year behind, and then continue and get the issues. The subject of drugs is what I'm going to be talking about for the next half hour, because the Iran-Contra committees obviously don't want to look into it, but the Senate and House will be looking into the matter of drugs. Danny Sheehan of the Christic Institute has been here in Carmel. He was here today, and he's going to San Francisco, where he will speak to quite a few large rallies, and he will be speaking in Berkeley and talking about his lawsuit. And, of course, that institute has major players in the drug scene that have been described in books and articles for many, many years, such as Theodore Shackley and John Singlaub and Thomas Kleins, and a lot of the very far-right ring groups, such as Tom Posey and members of his organization, the civilian military assistants, have been arrested on drug charges on the border down in New Mexico. So they've been throughout the world. These people have traveled and worked with the drug traffickers from the Bay of Pigs operation. They're a close-knit group, and one of the problems of getting this suit going is pulling together the credibility that is needed for people to support it financially. As I mentioned last week, it costs about $40,000 minimum a month to keep the lawsuit going. I'll take a 1-minute break and go back to some more articles on drugs just to illustrate how many there are and how believable this suit could be as it keeps evolving. This is Mae Brussell, and this is the second half of World Watchers, program number 821. Our new director of the CIA, Mr. William Webster, who was FBI director until a few months ago, had a particular liking for using Mafia people in sting operations and working with them. And one of the examples was just 2 years ago when it surfaced a large article in the San Francisco Examiner, many that followed, titled Ex-Mobster Tied to FBI's Iran Sting. And the article says a Bay Area man with a known Mafia background apparently was involved in the FBI sting operation to block illegal arms shipments to Iran. Tony Romano, a key figure in the Sunai Golf Course scandal in 1974, with a lengthy record of fraud, larceny, tax evasion, has been identified by 2 defendants in a case to charge with conspiracy of shipments to Iran. According to the FBI affidavit, Paul Sjeklocha, I mentioned him before, Sjeklocha, he's also known as Paul Cutler, and other defendants were going to fly missiles from the United States to Iran. They were to be used on the country's border with the war with Iraq. The United States Arms Control Act bans all arms sales to Iran. This was 1985, before people knew that the president was sending them. Until the late 60s, Romano was a Mafia lieutenant with Stefano Magradino family in Buffalo, New York. Romano was the Mafia leader Salvatore Samperi. He was also tried in Buffalo with connection to major jewel thefts. The government used him as their special agent, and he was to frame Paul Cutler Sjeklocha. He uses both names, and this same person, this Romano, was also an associate of Jimmy the Weasel, who just lost his security clearance and protection from the Justice Department that they give if you testify against certain drug or Mafia people, and now Patriano is out on his own. Romano was involved with persons in Florida, and Sjeklocha, as I say, uses the name Paul Cutler. They were sending more than $6 million of weapons to Iran. And Paul Cutler is a member of JINSA, the Israeli organization, JINSA, and he was arrested with several Israeli generals and with U.S. Army Colonel Wayne Gillespie. And it turns out that they have overturned this case. I believe Paul Cutler Sjeklocha is out of the case because it turned out that Ronald Reagan's secret team, Mr. Secord and Hakim, were sending arms to Iran. So they had to stop these people. And another member of their partnership was Mr. Cyrus Hashimi, who was killed in July, that next July, in London. And these people were literally framed by William Webster to stop these people from sending arms to Iran. They thought that they were working with the Central Intelligence Agency, with the United States government, and Paul Cutler also worked with 2 retired generals in Paris that were sending arms to Iran. And Romano told Paul Cutler, if you don't go through with it, your family is dead. So they went through with sending or making the gestures about to send the arms to Iran. and then the FBI had them arrested, similar to the Abscam operation. And then it turned out that when the arrest took place, Edwin Meese went to the Justice Department and said, I want to handle this case myself. He didn't want the Justice Department to handle it because it involved the persons working with. One of the men arrested was Mr. Evans, the attorney for Khashoggi. They were working with the identical people that Secor and Hakim were working with, a whole group. And so Romano, the crime figure, was brought in to stop them, and they were stopped by court orders and arrests. And then this was in August of 85, and by October of 86, the whole Iran-Contra story started to break open. And it's interesting that the FBI used a organized crime figure to arrest people that were doing what the White House was doing so that the White House wouldn't have competition with them. They know where to find the Mafia when they want them, and they know how to cut them loose when they don't need them. There's a new book coming out by Jonathan Whitney, a wonderful writer for the Wall Street Journal. It's called The Crimes of Patriots, The True Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA. It's published by W. Norton, and he was on television last week talking about the book, and the book goes into many areas, including the Nugan Hand Bank. He's an expert at that, and the role of our high military and admirals and generals and the Australian connections, but then the book has a lot more. He's great at that, and he also knows about the Southeast Asian drug connections and the P2 and Francesco Pazienza and the Italian connections of the drugs. So this will be a good book to read. I don't have it yet, but I want to indicate why I believe that Mrs. Reagan, as I said last week, doesn't want to go down in history remembered for nothing at all, and the peace overtures, if they worked in Central America, might help to cover up some of these drug articles. There was an article just this past week, and in these times, titled North's Security Officer is Linked to Alleged Arms Network. And this has to do with documents that Peter Dale Scott got. He's back there, the author, researcher in Washington, and it has to do with a man named Walter Gold that has a Washington News network, and he tried to buy influence over Jack Terrell. Terrell is now working with Peter Dale Scott and with a group of people at the International Center for Development Policy, and they got a hold of a document, and Walter Gold had introduced Jack Terrell to his good friend, Mr. Robinett. Robinett is the CIA man that built Ollie North's fence and who was given from $60,000 to $100,000 to try and break up the defendants in the Christic Institute case. And Gold and Robinett offered the two of them to set Mr. Terrell in business. He originally worked with the Contras, broke with the Contras, and is helping the Christic Institute and other researchers back east. So they tried to interfere with the way that Mr. Terrell's life would go and offered him to go into business. And Terrell said that Walter Gold was associated with General John Singlaub. Again, Singlaub comes into this picture, and with Leroy Manor formerly of the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia, that involved Theodore Shackley and Thomas Clines and Richard Secord, and the main defendants of the Christic Institute suit, and also a man named Dennis Suit. And the Atlanta-based operation they have is smuggling weapons, not drugs. But in this story, again, come the people that want to hurt the Christic Institute suit, that have all this money. John Singlaub, who's a defendant in the suit, and the allegations of this article is that Walter Gold is on the board of directors of Overseas Press Service. It's a company in Atlanta, Georgia, but it's also a cover. They have another operation that is run that sends weapons overseas, and these are the kinds of weapons that Singlaub, of course, could get to persons to stir up a revolution over there. One of the people mentioned in this article is that Dennis Suit, an Atlanta-based video journalist who's on the board of Overseas Press Service, and Leroy Manor of Nugan Hand Bank, a retired Air Force general who specialized in covert operations, was an officer of the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia. He has ties to intelligence operations and narcotic traffickers. Nugan Hand Bank was, I guess you'd say, 100% narcotic traffic money. And Jack Terrell, the person who's assisting the Christic, told Peter Dale Scott that the arms smuggling operation, they used a warehouse that belonged to a defunct military armaments corporation owned by Mitchell Werbel III. Now, just several years ago, in 1980, September 83, when I was writing the article on Western Goals and Larry McDonald for Larry Flint, it was Mitchell Werbel who moved into the home of Larry Flint along with G. Gordon Liddy and Gordon Novell, 3 top men from the Defense Department, so that this operation that is involved Leroy Manor with ties to the intelligence and narcotics traffic, with weapons trafficking, with John Singlaub, is a place where they tried to seduce a primary witness to the Christic suit. And, of course, this is where Robinett's money and Secord's money could go to win him to their side. And this article is a small one from In These Times, but it hits the top bases: the drug smuggling, the weapon smuggling, John Singlaub trying to buy off a witness by offering him a good job. And it hits the bases of the guns and the drugs and Singlaub and Werbel, who was one of the masters of coup d'etat when he was alive, and he has some very good students that have survived him. The San Jose Mercury and Washington Post, it was printed in both, had an article this past May: drug enforcement agents reportedly paid from Swiss accounts. Many of you saw the article. It had to do with the DEA being paid out of Secord and Hakim's accounts, allegedly to find hostages in Lebanon. It also turned that Adolfo Calero had donated $90,000 or so for the hostages. But the interesting part of this article is the fact that the NSC is using drug enforcement agencies and paying them from Swiss banks when Adolfo Calero has been named in the Christic Institute as being one of the people involved with the drug traffic out of Mr. Hall's ranch, and the very people that have been cited as from Vietnam and Southeast Asia and from Bay of Pigs, and then in the Central American operations and cocaine operations, that they are working with drug enforcement agent or agents and paying them money, and it's not coming out of the American till. We have plenty of money, CIA money. Casey had all he wanted, and so does the Defense Department and Defense Intelligence Agency, and if they wanted the hostages as a military operation, the DEA didn't have to be paid out of the Swiss banks. But I wonder if there are connections of this DEA, as are any DEA, to the drug traffic themselves, and if this guy wasn't being paid off because the drug stories were beginning to break. Newsday had a long article, April 19th, titled "Syrian Drug Dealer Linked to North's Arms Network." There were smaller articles about this that were repeated in some of the newspapers, but a listener in New York sent me the full copy of the Newsday article by Knut Royce on the Ollie North and Secord working with the most notorious and largest drug dealer associated with Syrian drugs. And, of course, Syria and large drugs brings up the name of Henry R. Sand and Steebaum, which is related to these particular people of the enterprise through all kinds of routes that I've cited on the programs before. This article from Newsday said Lieutenant Colonel North's private arms network purchased 158 tons of assault rifles, ammunition for the Nicaraguan rebels, from Monzer Al-Kassar, a reputed international narcotics smuggler, a terrorist who's linked to the Kili Laura hijacker. That's the only place where you could get arms, you understand? From a man linked to the Kili Laura hijacking, which made Ollie North the great hero of the extreme right, and from narcotics traffickers and terrorists. The arms businesses are mushrooming all over the world, and it could be less obvious if you bought them, say, from Southeast Asia or Japan or the Philippines, but going right to the source of heavy drugs and arms and kidnappings and buying it from them and supporting their operations really seems outrageous. The article says Monzer Al-Kassar, 42, a Syrian, also supplies arms to Abu Abbas, the head of the Palestine Liberation Front Unit and the mastermind of the 1985 Achille Lauri hijacking, and also to other Palestinian groups. Al-Kassar was twice arrested in London on narcotic smuggling charges, but of course he got off. Now, Ollie North's claim to fame was that he could move swifter than the CIA, that he and Secord, out of NAC had such quick action that they could intercept the plane that took the hijackers when it got to Rome and stopped the people of the Kili Laura, hijacking. Well, what they did, they got a few small fish. One of the primary people fell out of a window and was killed in Rome a few weeks ago. But Abu Abbas was indeed arrested by the people in Rome, and he was released. And he's out free, doing whatever drug smuggling or terrorism he wants. The article says the arms were purchased by a company linked to retired Air Force Major Richard Secord and his business associate Albert Hakim. The Al-Kassar family, which includes several brothers, is reputed to be the largest drug and arms dealing family in Syria. Well, if it's the largest drug family in Syria, it is part of that Henry Arsan operation. When he was arrested in 1982, they described it in Italy. It was 1981, the arrest of Henry Arsan as being the largest drug operation in the world. And at that time, the C-bomb was sending weapons to Iran. And this was linked to the P2 and also to the likes of Michael Ledeen. The money from those operations from Henry Arsan went to the pizza defendants in New York and to the Palermo trial that was deposited at Good Hunt and Merrill Lynch accounts. And I've done details on the P2 drug connection. So Ali North and Secord and Hakim have to buy their weapons from this particular outfit. The article says Al-Kassar is a wholesale arms buyer for the PLO, which retails the arms for profit. A U.S. criminal record document rap sheet labels Al-Kassar as, in big words, terrorist at the top of the page. It claims he had alleged ties to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine controlled by George Habash. And this is very important. Abu Abbas, the man responsible for the killing Laura, who's making the money off the selling us arms, who's a drug dealer, Abu Abbas is an associate of Dr. George Habash. Al-Kassar sold silencers, equipped assassination pistols, rockets, weapons to Libya, to Iran, South Yemen, and terrorist organizations in Syria and Lebanon. Now, I'm going to go to the name of Abbas in a moment. I'll finish this article and go to George Abbas, because I wrote up about George Abbas and his group working with Larry McDonald of Western Goals, of the John Birch Society, of a member of the House of Representatives, the man who went down on the KAL 007 in 1983, August 30th of that date, and then Western Goals went into the hands of Carl Spitz Channel. Now, Carl Spitz Channel is the money person who distributes the funds for the enterprises that Ollie North designates for the Contras and so forth. So if Larry McDonald's funds and connections went to George Habash, going back to when I wrote that article in fall of 1983, and now the Secord Hakim North team not only worked with Spitz Channel, who took over Western Goals from Larry McDonald, but they have the same network of drug dealers and weapon dealers and put money in the hands of those people, or are they continuing any kind of payoff drug traffic, vice versa, that they have to continue this business? The article says Al-Kassar was one of the two arms dealers who acted as a middleman in the $2.3 million ransom by the French government in June 86 for two Frenchmen held by terrorists in Beirut. Al-Kassar's tons of arms include AK-47 assault rifles, ammunition. They were put aboard a Panamanian freighter that Secord and Hakim rented called the Erie, E-E-R-I-E, which steamed out of Poland. The city is called Szczecin, Z-C-Z-E-C-I-N, in July 10th, 1986. That's when the Erie left. The Erie was purchased by Albert Hakim through a Panamanian shell company that was set up by North and Spitz Channel and Hakim called the Dolmy Business. While the ships came from Dolmy, the Danish ship came from Dolmy, the arms were purchased from another Panamanian company, Energy Resources. Now, Dolmy and Energy are both out of Switzerland, Hakim's accounts with Willard Zucker, but they used two companies, one for the weapons and one for the ship. The arms came out of the Syrian arms terrorist, and the ship came from Denmark and was purchased by Hakim. The arms company the arms were purchased from the Energy Resources, and many of you have seen that on the Ollie North charts, owned by Stanford Technology Training Corporation in California. That's Hakim out here in California. It's part of the Stanford Technology Training. And, of course, out in California, the closeness of Western Goals to Ronald Reagan's administration and the network of that group to Edwin Meese. I had detailed 4 hours on World Watchers going a long, long way back. The Danish shipping agent, Tom Parlow, played a central role in the arms deal. Hakim was the financial masterminder. Secord arranged the logistics. And Hakim had been a business partner with Willard Zucker for 10 years, and they handled the financing of this operation. Al-Kassar lives in Vienna, Austria, which is very convenient. Secord and Hakim have their operation, Stanford Technology Trading Group, besides in California, in Los Gatos, in Vienna, Virginia. Of course, you realize that would be just a coincidence. Helene von Damme, who was Ronald Reagan's secretary in California for 8 years, appointment secretary, and then was there in Washington for 6 years through the transition team, making appointments of hiring these kind of people before she became the ambassador to Vienna, was part of that Trans Computer International that I mentioned earlier von Borschwing's network, the international imaging that Hakim bought, and then she went on to be ambassador in Vienna, where Al-Kassar lives in Vienna. And there was one article that I had on the air about 4 or 5 months ago about Albert Hakim and weapons in or safe houses in Vienna that Helene von Damme helped him with. So it's interesting that Hakim has a partner where he picks up a person to sell him weapons from Poland who deals in narcotics in Syria and in Lebanon and sells weapons and narcotics to one of the world's largest drug dealers and arms dealers with their offices in Vienna, Austria. The article goes on, another mysterious arms dealer was involved with the deal in Marbella, that's in the Caribbean, Paul Craddock, C-R-A-D-O-C, who runs a firm called Caribbean International Airways. Craddock is alleged to receive financing for his arms from Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian who helped finance U.S. arms shipments to Iran. Craddock was described as Khashoggi's man, and some people in the Khashoggi operation were denying that. Al-Kassar was the middleman in the deal of these weapons. He arranged it with a company, a Polish agency, under the foreign ministry that controls foreign trade. Then he sold the weapons to North's group. Al-Kassar was described by a former intelligence officer as a major buyer, a buyer of consequence from Senzin, C-E-N-Z-I-N, which is the Polish agency and offices in Paris. Once the area left Poland with the Eastern Bloc weapons purchased by the Syrian arms dealers who supplied arms to Abbas, the PL unit that masterminded the Kililora. Once all that happened, it steamed into the Portugal town of Setúbal and picked up 200 more tons of arms. This was arranged by Theodore Shackley, famous in Southeast Asia, Nugan Han Bank, and in Saigon and so forth, in part of the cocaine operations, and working with Secord and Hakim in this operation from Portugal. The arms from Portugal included landmines, grenades, machine guns, purchased from a Portuguese firm called Defex. Al-Kassar used Portugal as a transshipment point, and he works a lot in Portugal as well as in Vienna, Austria. Financial problems started when the ship was loaded up with the weapons. North Network expected Congress to resume the financing of the arms to the Contras before October. This is, again, I'm reading from the article from Newsday, April 19, 1987. That money hadn't yet arrived. Some 358 tons remained aboard the Iria, which stayed in Portugal for almost 2 months. Now, let me just interject here that when Secord again was testifying and North was testifying, their great forte is that we are better than the CIA. We move fast. We can do anything. We can get things done. You spend so long with your bureaucracy. Well, look what happens to their ship. These bumbling people have to go to drug dealers and smugglers, the world's most renowned hijackers, to get something. And now the ship is sitting around in Portugal for 2 months. In September, the ship went to Cherbourg and unloaded the cargo on the port's ammunition dock. September 13th, a second ship came along, the Iceland Saga, and picked up the weapons. A week later, September 20th, and sailed for Puerto Barrios in Guatemala. At this point, Admiral Poindexter ordered Oliver North to pressure CIA Casey to make things right for Secord. So while they're testifying on the stand about how terrible the CIA is, it can't get anything done, when they're stuck in the mud and can't get the ship going and can't get the money they're supposed to have, and goodness knows what they did with it or how they expected to move this around, then they go to the CIA, the very CIA that Casey had to go beyond, and Secord and Hakim and North went beyond because it couldn't function. But then they call on the CIA to help bail us out, so they go to the CIA. So the CIA agrees to help them out. They agree to buy the weapons through an American arms dealer named James Atwood and get the money that is needed for the weapons. And so they offer $1.4 million. And one source said the arms had a retail value of $5.5 million, and Hakim and Secord had been trying to get more than $2 million for the shipment. The Iceland Saga abandoned its it abandoned itself in Puerto Barrios, and instead then it steamed into North Carolina. It hasn't gotten to the Contras yet. October the 8th, it arrived at the Army Sunny Point Munitions Depot, unloaded the arms, went to Wilmington where ammunition was taken off. The arms have since been delivered to the Contras by freighter, bailed out by the Central Intelligence Agency. The ammunition was retained by Atwood, a retired military officer. They're all CIA, ex-CIA or ex-Defense Department, who runs a business out of Savannah, Georgia. His profit from the deal will come when he sells the 3 million rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition. It reminds me of the 7.62 Mannlicher Carcano that allegedly was used to kill John Kennedy. So Secord and North testified that their secret teams were better than anybody else's. They could get things done. And not only didn't it work, but they used people that were marked top terrorists on the intelligence reports. They worked with one of the largest narcotic dealers in Syria. And all this roundabout transaction seems a little complicated, working with a person who was responsible for the Achille Laura and so forth. And a lot of questions have to be asked about what were they doing in that part of the world and with the drug enforcement agents, and was it arms they were working on really, or was there more involved in, I don't know how they work with these drug dealers, but it seems very mysterious to get so tangled and come up with so little, working at such a danger point in case people knew that's who they were working with. And of course, once it came out, people didn't even seem too concerned about it. Now, when I drew that picture with Larry McDonald's face on it, the Larry McDonald pie that was in the February 84 Hustler, I referred to Robert Byron Watson's testimony or affidavit on the role of Larry McDonald working with George Habash out of Lebanon, the Georgia connections to Lebanon, and to his brother Faoud Habash and the Nazi connections in Chile, involved with the coup in Chile and the takeover of the government there. And I wrote about the role of the Habashes in funding the campaign, allegedly working with Larry McDonald, that money was coming in and that it was helping his being elected or put into the till of what other politics, far-right politics, he wanted. In fact, I wrote, Larry McDonald's unsavory Chilean connection was exposed by Robert Byron Watson and presented to attorneys of the House Select Committee on Assassinations with alleged affidavit detailing Larry McDonald's dealings with Faoud Habash Ansar in Santiago de Chile. In fact, this affidavit, Watson claimed that Faoud Habash is the brother of Arab terrorist leader Dr. George Habash of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This is an organization that is said to work with our CIA as it arranges Arab terrorist murders around the world. And, of course, the Achille Laura was an example, and the mindset of these people was to take the Jew, there were many Jews on the boat, take the Jew in the wheelchair, dump him in the water, and Ollie North works closely, allegedly, with anti-terrorist groups that I think are agent provocateur groups to create terrorist situations so that he and his ilk can have more power and muscle. Now, just a few moments to run down some articles about the Iran-Contra drug connections that are coming from the right, left, and middle, and not any particular way in the newspaper. Spotlight has an article by Victor Marchetti, who wrote The Cult of Intelligence, the CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, a 2-page article, U.S. Spies Face Drug Charge in Iran-Contra Arms Scandal. And it's got a list of the defendants from the Christic Institute and a long 2-page article on the Christic Institute and their suit and their drug traffic. Bravo, a magazine or newspaper from the American Veterans Organization, has a 4 or 5 page article about the cover-up of the heroin coming in from Southeast Asia, from Kung Sa, the discovery of Bo Gritz, and the road to heroin heaven. Also, there was a news release by Representative Charles Rangel, Democrat of New York, objecting to the fact that the Washington Post lied about the House investigation, and he accused them of covering up by printing an article. This letter was July 22nd, 1987, where he said 4 aspects of your story, July 27th, regarding our committee's July 21st briefing on possible contra-drug smuggling relationships concerns me because you wrongly convey the impression that the committee reached the conclusion that no evidence exists linking the Contras to drug smuggling. First, your headline, quotes, Hill panels find no evidence linking Contras to drug smuggling, end quote, is misleading because it says we drew one conclusion, while in fact we reached quite a different one. It is true, as you quote me, that we did not receive any evidence that could show Contra leadership was involved in drug smuggling. However, we did not conclude that there was no evidence of Contra involvement in drug smuggling. Rather, based on the information presented, the committee agreed there is a strong need for further congressional investigation into the allegations made. The committee agreed to turn over all material we gathered to the House Judiciary Committee on Crime, which has jurisdiction and has been conducting an extensive investigation. The members agreed to cooperate in every way. Secondly, the opening paragraph of the story says we've been investigating allegations that Contra leaders were in drug smuggling. Like the headline, this too is inaccurate, but here by omission. We have been investigating whether any elements of the Contras, not just the leadership, but equally important, the investigating the U.S. federal agencies' acquiescence and the covering up of the investigation. We're investigating that, and he objected that they're making it look like they found no evidence of drug trafficking to support the Contra cause. My time is up. I wanted to do a lot more. There's about 20 good articles out on the Contras and drugs this past month, and maybe I'll have time next week or continue later. Maybe you're seeing it in your newspapers. There are a lot of articles, and the Senate and House are pursuing it, so don't give up if Lawrence Welch's committee turned their back on the subject, but the Senate and House are investigating these more and more every day. This is Mae Brussell. I'll be back with you next week, and we'll continue and maybe, hopefully, do 1 hour on what is going on in the Philippines.